So Bill Maher had Candace Owens on his Club Random podcast, and immediately people started sending me clips of it, and I started seeing those clips and saying to myself, do not click on this, don't watch this, but hey, it's like a bad car wreck or watching some dude get stomped by a bull at the rodeo. You just have to see what happens, you know. There's a whole lot about that interview that I could react to, but there was one segment that kind of leaped off the page at me, and I don't want to talk about it first. It was when they started talking about January 6th, and Candace Owens immediately chimed in to say, well, but what about the BLM protest of 2020? Now, I thought Bill Maher did do a good job. I have to hand it to him. I thought he did a good job of making his case for January 6th. But there was one thing that he left off that had I been sitting there in that conversation, I would have had to point it out to Candace Owens. And to anyone who tries to compare the BLM protest of 2020 with January 6th, I always say to those people, those are complete apples and oranges, and it's not fair to even compare the two. Because a protest is the voice of the unheard. And for years, people of color had been telling us and talking about police brutality. They have been talking about the racism within the justice system. It's something they have been talking about for years and years, but nothing changed. Nothing ever got done. Nothing ever got fixed. No one ever worked on anything to make anything any better, and they just kept voicing what was going on. And then in 2020, when you had the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, when you had Jacob Blake gunned down, people started rising up and saying, hell, enough of this. We have to take this to the streets. We have to protest because our voices aren't being heard. Now, there was a lot of agitators at those protests that helped to escalate the violence, and I'm not here to condone the violence. But at the end of the day, no matter how you slice it, those protests were the voice of the unheard. January 6th was not the voice of the unheard because the people there cast their votes in a free and fair election, and they just weren't happy that the election didn't go their way. They didn't get their way. And so they went to the Capitol with the intention of overthrowing the government, some threatening to hang the vice president, taking Trump flags, taking Confederate flags and planting them there like they were in some kind of battle because in their minds they were. So that in no way was a protest. That was in no way the voice of the unheard. That was an insurrection. And when people starts comparing the two, they're doing it to start a what about argument, and they're doing it to distract from the facts. And no matter how you slice it, at the end of the day, the people on January 6th were upset because things didn't go their way and because they had been lied to and duped into believing that the election was stolen. Bill Maher did point out how that everyone in Trump's team, including his own daughter, everyone told him he lost. At the end of the day, he even knew he lost, but he kept pushing the lie. He kept pushing it until he escalated an insurrection on our nation's capital. So to compare those two things, to go back and try to compare it to the BLM protest, it's bullshit. Because first of all, another thing needs to be said here too, is the BLM protest was not about Democrats versus Republicans. If you talked, that wasn't like that a bunch of black Democrats and a bunch of black conservatives came to have a protest against each other. It was not a political issue in their mind. It wasn't Democrat versus Republican. It was police brutality and it was racial injustice. That's what that was about. January 6th was political. January 6th was our side lost and we can't accept it, so we're going to come up here and burn the place to the ground if we have to because we don't like the results of the election. But their voices were heard. And that's why I just have no sympathy for these insurrectionists that are getting jailed. I have no sympathy for them at all because they said leading up to it they were going to do it. They went up there and they did it, and then they tried to turn and blame it on BLM and Antifa. Then they tried to turn it on someone else like it was their fault. But they said they were going to do it prior to that, and then on January 6th, they attempted to do it. And now they're saying that if Trump gets locked up, we're going to see more of that. And every time they say that, I screenshot their comments so I can come back and show them later, hey, don't try to blame this on BLM. Don't try to blame this on Antifa. You said it was going to happen. So, you know, that was one segment of the show that I thought Bill Maher did good arguing about January 6th, but that's the one point that I would have added in there. I'm sure there's more to that train wreck of a conversation that I could talk about. There's definitely a few segments that I may react to because a lot of it had me sitting there scratching my head. But yeah, I guess Bill Maher for me, I said before that I was not going to be watching him, not going to be listening to him. But you know what? At the end of the day, it's one of those things you just can't look away from, because when you see Bill Maher versus Candace Owens, you know that it's going to be interesting to say the least, and it sure as hell was. But yeah, anytime someone tries to compare those two things together, it's apples and oranges, and I'm sure I will be back with more reactions to that ridiculous conversation with Candace Owens and Bill Maher.